The New York City vax mandate is officially lifted for performers and athletes, at least, meaning that one Mr. Kyrie Irving can officially join the Brooklyn Nets in and on a full-time basis. Where does that land Brooklyn now when it comes to title shots? Are they right back to being a contender? Are they the actual favorite of being a contender from here on in? That's what we're going to be breaking it down all on the Locked On Nets podcast.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Doug Norrie, DFSR here, covering you on DraftKings and FanDuel. Also want to make sure to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by NBA Top Shot. NBA Top Shot is the future of being an NBA fan. Officially licensed rare NFTs are the greatest moments from NBA history. Sign up today at lockedon.nbatopshot.com. One more day of hotel podcasting from yours truly. We'll be back again in the full podcasting cave starting next week. A little jaunt out here to the West Coast with the family has meant that, upending the podcasting schedule, especially the background here if you're watching on YouTube, just a little bit. It's okay. We'll be back again in the regular digs starting next week. But as we come here leading into Friday, or, you're probably listening to this Friday morning at some point, we now know that it's official. We had said that it was basically going to be the case yesterday on, leading into the Memphis game, that the vaccine mandate regarding performers in New York City and athletes had been officially lifted. Eric Adams made the announcement on Thursday afternoon that was going to be the case, setting the stage for baseball players, Mets and Yankees. People thought that was kind of what, greased the wheels a little bit in terms of getting this thing to happen. And specifically, Kyrie Irving would now be able to return full-time to the Brooklyn Nets at home at Barclays. Sunday's almost definitely going to be rocking. That's the first home game that Brooklyn has. They have a game, obviously, before that, just because, they play Miami on Saturday, and then on Sunday, they host Charlotte on the back-to-back. There's good reason to believe that the Barclays fans are going to be going absolutely nuts when Kyrie Irving officially steps back on the court there after, essentially a year away. He, went down in the playoffs last year with the ankle that got twisted under Giannis in that series. And basically, fans of Barclays have not seen Kyrie Irving short of him sitting courtside since then. So it's been a long, frustrating time period, obviously, without Kyrie Irving. And hopefully, thankfully now, that is coming to an end, and he's going to be back taking the court full-time for the Brooklyn Nets. And in that, kind of wanted to talk today about where the expectations should be for the Brooklyn Nets for the rest of the season. Adam and I, over the course of this last week, have been talking, specifically about, what needs to happen over these last now 9 games of the season to feel good about the playoff prospects, what sort of needs to shake out with some other teams, how the rest of the Eastern Conference might want things to roll when it comes to, who they want to face and how the playoff scenario is going to go. But I think, based on where we started this season, if we walk it back all the way to the beginning and before the mandate came out, as they're coming out of the summer, and it's like when hopes were never higher, let's say that, when Brooklyn Nets fans' hopes and team hopes, organizational hopes, were never higher around the team. They were the odds-on favorite to win the championship. It looked like they had very few weaknesses. They were going to have the top 3 guys, Durant, Harden, Kyrie. We knew what that looked like when those guys were all fully healthy. It appeared as if they were all coming in fully healthy to start the season. Their win total was like 56.5. They were the favorites to win the championship. That feels like an absolute lifetime ago, but that was the expectation going into the season. Obviously, just about everything has gone wrong on every level from this year, from the mandates to injuries to just like certain role players not working out and more injuries and, protracted timelines. And obviously Harden gets traded and, bring in Ben Simmons. And it's just been one thing after another the whole season. But now that we're starting to look at a situation where they could be coming back in a sort of full-time mode, especially around Kyrie Irving. Is it time for us to begin rethinking the expectation around where the Brooklyn Nets stand as title contenders? And this is a really hard question to answer. So let's start on a high level. Where do they stand in terms of odds? We mentioned this yesterday. I can update this for where you are today in terms of championship odds. Right now, according to our good friends over at Bet Online, they stand at a plus 575 chance betting odds to win the NBA championship this season. Phoenix Suns are number one at plus 350. Behind them, Warriors plus 650. Then the Bucks at plus 700. And then the Sixers plus 85. Celtics at plus 850. The reason I kind of read out what some of these title chances are for these teams is, according to betting markets, I don't know how much huge money is getting in on these markets right now, but like I said, on Bet Online, which is pretty at this point industry standard for where the rest of we'll call it Vegas, just in terms of where money is going, the Nets really kind of stand somewhere around this part of the graph when it comes to championship odds. And it's funny when you look at this. So when you looked at that number and you said to yourself, are they championship contenders? It'd have to be a resounding yes. You can't be the second overall odds on favorite, second overall odds on favorite to win the championship, and then say, are they championship contenders? And say no, because that just doesn't compute, right? Like if they weren't, they would not, be ranked second in what is often a very accurate look at where things stand on a high level. And as much as people want to dig Vegas and betting houses and books and this for, getting it wrong, they get it right. When you take in just the long view of where things land with these odds, it's right. That's just how they remain in business. And that's just what it is. It's hard for me to hear people talk about, well, they're not always right. Of course, that's why these things are laid out in probabilities, not in certainties. No one's going to say, are you certain the Suns are going to win the championship? Yes or no. Or the Nets or whoever else. That's just not how this works. So if you label them second overall right now, you have to say, of course, are they championship contenders? Yes. This is where smart people with money, people with a lot on the line when it comes to getting this kind of idea right. It's yes. And then I still can't help but feel sometimes just like a little confused about why they stand this high up in these, standings. And maybe that's because the season itself has just been so weird. It's been such a weird season and I'm going to get into in a little bit why there's still great uncertainty with this team. Like the mandate being lifted is one thing. We're still far from, fully cleared up around, making sure all of our ducks are in a row when it comes to the Nets team. And maybe that's part of it. Maybe it's when we look at the actual team that we see on the court, or what we know has happened with this team over the course of a season, looking at them as the second overall favorites just feels like this, almost like an uncanny valley feeling. Like, if you're not familiar with uncanny valley is, it's when you look at something that's, close to being real, but just not real enough. So it becomes very off-putting. And I don't know if we would call this, these numbers off-putting, but I find it weird. Like there's some kind of gap between what the reality is and where books like Bet Online have the Nets here. And I think that maybe is more built on what's happened over the course of the season and some uncertainty than it is with maybe the reality. And sometimes that's a good time to gut check the reality piece of it and say, is my head lining up with what the actual reality is? These numbers would say maybe not. Maybe the Nets are far closer to an absolute title contender than even I willing to believe. Or maybe it's because this season has gone so weird for the Nets that I don't want to start holding out too much hope as, someone who talks about the team every single day. And also just as a person that wants to see them win, it's almost like, do I not want to put myself in this belief structure of, oh, I can't start thinking about them as a championship. I just need to get them into the playoffs. Then my head can go there. I just need to get them in past the play-in game. I need to get them out of the first round. Then I can start thinking about it, which is a totally different mindset than we had at the beginning of the year. Because at the beginning of the year, if you heard the plan was on the table, you would have thought, I mean, something went seriously wrong, which it did. And you wouldn't be able to compute it. It wouldn't make sense. But now that we've readjusted expectations around it, we have to say to ourselves, okay, with this new view of the Nets season, am I willing to let myself start to believe like I wanted to believe back in September, back in August, back in September, back when it looked like 56.5 games was the lowest number you could ever come up with for this team because they were going to be like on their way to 60 easy. And that obviously went away pretty quick. So I think from a high level, looking at where markets have them right now, we have to say to ourselves, are they a contender? Yes. I think we have to be clear about that. But coming up, I want to talk about some of the other teams that stand in their way and why that's both a good thing for the Nets and maybe not so good of a thing for the Nets. And then eventually we're going to talk about, what this final iteration of this team looks like. Like, can we picture 5 guys on the court for the Nets that are playing championship level basketball? And I'm talking about like a closing group, because that's sometimes what you need to think about when it comes to the championship level teams is like, who are the 5 guys on the court that are going to be closing another team down to take this thing home? Because that's, in the end, that's what it comes down to. It comes down to whether your best 5 is going to match up with everybody else out there. Before we talk about that, have to talk about our friends over at Bet Online. I already talked about Bet Online plenty on this episode. We know we're chugging through the basketball season, getting toward the playoffs. College basketball is in full swing right now. You can get all the latest odds, contests, and player props over on betonline.net. It's the #1 source for all of your sports betting needs and info. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. Not just basketball either. BetOnline, we covered it with basketball with some of these odds. They got, everything else in there. Live betting, got your favorite Vegas casino games. Like I said, every single sport you can imagine. Head on over to the website, betonline.net. Use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. Bet Online, where the game starts. All right, the second piece we want to look at when it comes to trying to evaluate the Nets' title chances is, who they would have to go through to get there. Because obviously, this stuff doesn't just happen in a vacuum. You don't just have what you think is the best team and then anoint them champion because they look the best on paper. We obviously know that's not how this kind of thing works. And there has to be we have to go through, what kind of scenarios need to happen for the Nets to make a run, an actual run to the championship. I'm willing now, I think pretty fairly to say that the Nets are going to be at least the 8th seed. I think having Kyrie back and knowing that situation has basically been cleared up over these last 9 games. I think that plus, as long as they can maintain the 8th seed here, I'm already putting caveats in that, knowing that they only need to win 1 game out of 2 to move into the 8th seed, I think I can feel pretty comfortable with that. In that scenario, they will always have the best player on the court in Kevin Durant. That's a great place to start, knowing that you have Kyrie Irving as well. I think that too. So I'm going to, for the purposes of this next piece, going to put them past the playing game and into the 8th seed. And I'm hoping that this doesn't look super outdated, in a week or so if something weird happens again. But I think at some point you just have to lay out a scenario that looks realistic. I think that is totally realistic if we just put it in the context of, look, having Kevin Durant on your team is better than at least for the playing game, is better than anyone else that any of these other teams have. And we know he has help now in a superstar in Kyrie. So let's put him in the 8th seed. Without looking specifically at who they would need to go through, like who's going to be the 1 seed, although that's looking more and more like it's going to be Miami. Although, as we speak now, it's, I guess Sixers and Bucks are only a game and a half back. Celtics too. So that's just becoming something of a logjam. Right now it's Miami. Those other teams are all basically knotted up through the 2 through 4. That's okay. We'll group them all together because to get into the championship, the Nets would likely or have to go through, 2 or 3 of these teams to be able to get there. And so what, in this scenario, we say to ourselves, how do the Nets stack up against the rest of the Eastern Conference? So let's do the good news first. The good news first is they have the best player among those in the Eastern Conference when he is at his peak, which he's looking like he's playing right now, in Kevin Durant. So great place to start. It's good from an Eastern Conference standpoint that I don't think there's an elite team in this bunch. So that's the other good news piece here, is that you can't look at any of these teams and say to yourself, we're looking at peak Warriors here, right? Or we're not looking at the version of the Nets we thought we were going to get at the beginning of the season with the big three. Like that would be very scary propositions. No team in the Eastern Conference is constructed that way right now. And that's a good thing for the Nets. So because there's very good teams, I wouldn't call any of the teams in the Eastern Conference great. And when you can't call any of the Eastern Conference teams great, that the field there's a little more of a leveled playing field than maybe in years past when you could look at, a stacked team or two. It's actually a little different in the Western Conference because Phoenix has just been rolling through teams this season that it's looking like it would be very hard to beat them in a 7-game series. And, we saw what happened with a very similarly constructed team last year in the finals who lost to Milwaukee, which I think is a decent comp. So the issue for the Eastern Conference is less about that there's a great team in there and more about that every team is just kind of very good. And this is where the situation becomes a little bit harder because while you're not scared of each team on an individual, you're not scared of one team on an individual basis, you are saying to yourself, to get all the way to the finals for the Nets is going to be such a massive uphill climb just based on there's no easy outs here. One, we know they're starting probably around the 8th or 7th seed, which means they're going to play one of these teams to start. They're going to probably play Miami, Philly, Milwaukee, Boston. I'm going to put those groups, and then there's a drop off to the Bulls. The first round will almost definitely be one of those teams. Now, do they match up better against some of those teams than others? 100%. We saw them dumpster the Sixers. Adam and I talked about it the other day. We know that they would readily invite a series against Philly right now, just knowing what we know about how they feel about some of the guys on the team, the aforementioned Harden, what Durant and Joel Embiid have gotten into over the course of the season. I think the Nets probably, if they could vote for it, would vote for that right now. It would still be a very difficult series. Like, despite the Nets probably wanting that, it would be a very, very hard series for them to go 7 games against arguably the best pound for pound physical center in all of basketball in Joel Embiid, and a guy in Harden who, while he has all his warts in big games, is still an elite guard. And they have other pieces that make things difficult. Tobias Harris, whatever you want to say about him. We know Thibault can defend. We know Maxi's become a really, really great secondary player. So that's over the course of a 7-game series, that is going to be tough. Same with Miami. We know Miami, again, they lack the superstar. They have everything else. They have the best coach in basketball, arguably, but I think that most would vote him there in Eric Spoelstra. They have no, elite talent, but they have great talent across the board. Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo. Obviously, Kyle Lowry's been in this situation before. Tyler Hero is, their best half-court scorer probably, and is going to close games. And then we know they have PJ Tucker, who gave Kevin Durant the absolute business last year in the playoffs. And whether they got PJ just to deal with him specifically, I don't know, but they have him. That would be an absolute grind of a 7-game series if they have to play that one. So those are 2 of those situations. Okay, maybe they luck out and get Boston. Have you seen what Boston's done lately? Boston's been absolutely unbelievable. You can't score on them. Like, the defense is freaking ridiculous. They're so long. We saw them play against the Celtics the other day. A 7-game series in a grind against this defense would take a lot out of you. Now, would the Nets be favored in the series? Yeah, probably. But, well, maybe it's close, though. This team, while maybe they lack, some amazing half-court scoring, we know Tatum is close to probably making the leap. We saw what he did against the Nets pretty recently. And we know this defense is a very, very tough nut to crack. I mean, the defense that they've played basically over the second half of the season has been the best in the league. And they are just bulldozing some teams now. This, again, would be a very difficult 7-game series. And then, okay, you don't get one of those 3. You get the Bucks, Giannis, Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton hurt right now, but looking like his timeline's going to be back before the playoffs. We know how that went last year. Yeah, they had PJ Tucker. You still have Giannis. Arguably, Giannis is the best player in basketball, right? Like, especially if you consider offense and defense. Like, you can kind of see what I'm saying here about this path to the championship, that while, again, the Nets can stack up against these teams, getting through them all the way down to it is going to be very, very difficult. And so this is where I start to, want to make sure we're taking things one game at a time also, because the Eastern Conference is like one of those very difficult years to be in the Eastern Conference. All these teams are good. It's very deep. Like, I don't think the Chicagos and Clevelands of the world stand, or Toronto, or definitely the teams underneath, stand to be able to take 7-game series from those other teams. So I'm going to leave them out of the equation here because I really don't think that any of those teams are going to get through the first round. Could be wrong. That's just my gut feeling on that right now. But no matter how it lands for the Nets, just getting through all this to start, getting through 3 of these teams to start is going to be a total and utter grind. And every time you get to have to chip away a little bit about that, it chips off some of your championship equity. Like, that's just the reality of the situation. When it's very, very difficult each and every round. Like, think back to last year when the championship was sort of when things were really cooking against the Celtics. The Nets smoked the Celtics. Yeah, the Celtics took 1 game on the back of a heroic Tatum performance. The rest of it was not even close. It was a total cakewalk. They put no effort into it. They didn't need to. That's okay. That's sort of what the first round is supposed to be about. But that's just not going to be the case this year. There's not going to be an easy out really at any point in the series. And like I said, that starts to chip away at what you can consider for a championship level team. All right, next we're going to talk about what the actual 5 for the Nets looks like. Where are we in terms of a championship level squad that we could think about closing games, that we could feel very comfortable about, standing there in the last 2 to 5 minutes of Game 7 up against any other 5 from any other team in the league? Would the Nets 5 stand up against, against this hypothetical other team that made it to the conference finals or the NBA championship? We'll talk about that in a second. First, got to talk to you about NBA Top Shot. I mentioned Top Shot at the beginning of this. If you haven't heard about this, you really need to start getting on this now. NBA Top Shot's the officially licensed NFT of the NBA. You can connect with a community of hundreds of thousands, you heard that right, of NBA fans. And this is sort of the next natural progression of fantasy sports. It's a way for you to completely upgrade the experience of your fan. You could think of Top Shots like trading cards. We've been down the trading card path for years and decades, and 100 years maybe at this point now. NBA Top Shot works very similarly, except it works online. You can open up packs, and inside are NFTs of moments that were created throughout the history of the NBA. And you get those moments, and they are yours to trade or do what you want with, keep and collect and store. That's just kind of how the NBA Top Shot movement works. And if you told people before that you could open up a pack of a baseball card and then you could own part or all of some of these moments or all these baseball cards early on, you would do it in an absolute second. This is essentially what's happening with the NFT market that I'm sure you've heard about, because it's absolutely just kind of busting down the doors here in terms of tech. Investors in NBA Top Shot include Michael Jordan, maybe you heard of him, Kevin Durant, maybe you heard of him, Will Smith in there as well. And then they have just tons of players in the community, Tyrese Halliburton, Cole Anthony, Harrison Barnes. And you might say to yourself, why would I buy a highlight? Because that's what you're buying. You're buying highlights here. And if you could just watch it on YouTube for free, but that's just not what you're buying here. It's about having an ownership stake in what's akin to a stock market for the NBA's greatest highlights. Look, we're in the future here, folks. This is the future. The NFTs, Top Shots, this kind of thing. This is the future of collecting. Get in on this now. You can get in on challenges, exclusive moments, NFT rewards. It's all there on NBA Top Shot. Also, Top Shot moments can get you access to events you can use in similar mini games on a regular basis. NBA Top Shot is the future of being an NBA fan. Own officially licensed rare NFTs of the greatest moments from NBA history. Sign up today at LockedOnNBATop.com. And when you're done with that, go and grab yourself a Built Bar. It's that time of year. Some of you may have given up on your New Year's resolutions. I've been on vacation this week. It's been super tough. When you're at the vacation, it's the pool, you're ordering food, you don't know what's coming out of you. Take a break from the meals. I've been trying to do that. Grab a Built Bar. I know I'm giving myself something healthy. I can maybe even supplant it for a meal for there, so I don't need to feel as guilty. Maybe you want to try the Puffs. Those are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow covered in 100% real chocolate. You're saying to yourself, how can this be healthy? That's because the stats back it up. 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar. You can't even do a candy bar. 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, dozens of net carbs, the flavors, mint brownie, coconut, almond, and the new white chocolate cookies and cream. Get on Built Bar now. You go to Built.com, use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right. So as we're talking about the situation here with the Nets, when we want to look at a championship team, we have to think about a championship team, I think, as who's on the court for you at the end of the season. And end of the season, the final whistle of the final game, whether it's game 7 of the finals or somewhere in the finals, can I picture within reason, if I have a championship level team at my disposal, going into the playoffs or by the time the playoffs ends? And that is, I think, among all things, the trickiest thing to answer for the Brooklyn Nets right now. What does the closing 5 look like? I think last year when everything was rolling and cooking, we kind of knew what that looked like. Okay. Before everyone got hurt, we knew the lineup, they could go small, and it was basically Harden, Kyrie, KD, Jeff Green, Joe Harris. I know I'm not putting that in kind of positional order, but you get the point. Like, they could close very small. No team could stop that on defense. It's just too much to handle. You can go like Jeff Green at the 5 and go 5 out essentially. And we saw what the numbers were with that team. That is a championship level team, 100%. They were going to out offense you. They had just enough defense to get by. In the end, it wasn't going to matter. That is just way too much superstar firepower. Plus the role players were big enough, long enough, strong enough, and could stretch the court that you could really envision that being the case. Then Kyrie gets hurt. Then then Kyrie gets hurt. Then Harden's the hamstring is really never recovers. Jeff Green was hobbling around by the end of that Bucks series. I know Joe missed some threes too. Okay, that's not injury related, but it just kind of didn't work out. So everything sort of crumbled at the end. But again, going into the playoffs, even during that Boston series, we said to ourselves, yes, this is 5 guys. These 5 guys can bring home the hardware. No doubt about it. Going into this playoff, I don't know if we have that. Okay, so a couple problems. One, we still don't know the status of Ben Simmons. If you want to be on the optimistic side, I'm trying to be more optimistic. I was not as optimistic with the Kyrie piece and the mandate. I was wrong about that. So I'm going to try be a little more glass half full guy. There's been some encouraging reporting lately from a few different, dialed in sources that we could see a return of Ben Simmons before the end of the season. Scoopy Robinson from Bally Sports had mentioned it about a week ago that there was optimism about Simmons, even following the epidural in his back and the fact that he had a herniated disc. There was still optimism that he could come back. Shams Charania went on the Pat McAfee show earlier on Thursday and discussed that he felt that there was optimism as well. Obviously, we know Shams is connected very closely to Clutch, who represents Ben Simmons. So when he reports on Ben Simmons, you have to feel like that is good reporting. I mean, Shams is the good reporter anyway, so I'm not saying that. I'm just saying there's an extra level of tie-in when it comes to Shams and Ben Simmons. So you have a situation where I think you can envision getting Ben Simmons back. Okay, that's good. That actually goes a long way to starting to solve the puzzle of what do the 5 guys look like, because Ben Simmons is essentially the exact kind of guy the Nets need right now. We've seen multiple times that in a closing 5 situation without him, it gets a little funky because there are clear weaknesses almost no matter which way you take it. We know that KD and Kyrie are in it for sure. After that, it becomes sort of a mix and match puzzle around who they can keep on the court for longer stretches. You want to think Steph Curry is going to stay out there in a championship game against bigger wings. They're going to kind of hunt him down. That proposition looks a little worse. You want to think that Nick Claxton can stay on the court for that time and be able to close because his ability to switch and the athleticism, the finishing around the rim has gotten a little better as well as decision-making. I can squint and see it, I think. And let's just keep him out there for right now. So, that's 4 of it. And then who's that 5th guy? Okay. Is it Patty Mills? A little too small. Now you're getting really small. Bruce Brown, you like it. Probably him. And we think we have enough offense, right? So let's say right now, without Ben Simmons, it's the best 5-ish. If we want to try to get super athletic, feel free to at me, by the way, if you think I'm off with this one. If we want to get super athletic, KD, Kyrie, Bruce Brown, Seth Curry, Nick Claxton. Is that a 5-man lineup that you can see closing out the highest of high-level games and being able to shore up every piece of weakness that they might have? I think that's asking a lot. The defensive end, it's pretty small. Like, I think you're really against any bigger wings out here. You're going to be in trouble, against lineups like Milwaukee's lineup, Boston even, with Tatum, Jaylen Brown, guys like this. Like, you're really starting to lose significant size advantages and maybe even athleticism, but they can probably make it up with some quickness there. I think it's hard for me to see that 5 being the closing 5. Now, you want to tell me Ben Simmons on the optimism piece is going to be able to come back here and play physically, maybe not meant physically, like we saw him last year and the year before, where he's among, the best defensive players in the league, and he's able to get out in transition, and he's able to guard essentially 5 positions. You want to tell me that? I would start to change my tune, and the guy hasn't played in a year, by the time he comes back, if he does, this will have been a long extended absence. And then now having him ramp up and playing the most high leverage basketball that you can play in the league is going to ask a lot. But I would feel a lot better, because once you start slotting him in there into like those Jeff Green sort of like Joe Harris wing minutes, I know they're not comps, obviously, but you start to need some of that size and athleticism to guard up on some of the bigger, wings and just some of the best players in basketball. This is a piece that starts to unlock it for them. So I think once we can add him in, mitigates some of the problems you have around like a Seth Curry on the court. It's easier to keep him for longer stretches. You could probably still close with Bruce Brown and know you had a good point of attack defender. You have no rim protection at all. I think at that point, you're hoping to out offense most teams, knowing that it's going to be a problem against some of the bigger centers in the league. 100%. Nets are probably going to have some of that problem anyway. So I think when it all comes down to it, this honestly, among all the different aspects of thinking about them as a championship level team, this is the part that gives me the biggest pause. I paused a little bit knowing what kind of road they would have to run through, although I still can picture them going 7 throughout. I can picture them winning each of those rounds sort of like in a vacuum. It's just this final piece, this last closing lineup piece that I feel like I just wish Jeff Green was still here. I wish to some degree Joe Harris was still here for the size and the elite shooting. It's less than Jeff Green. It's just like that one guy that's like one other bigger physical defender that can take some of the defensive load off Kevin Durant, so he doesn't need to guard the other team's best guy in every moment. Ben Simmons solves a lot of that, and it's just hard to imagine 40 minutes a game in Game 7 of the playoffs when he just hasn't been around to have done it in a long time. So this is where I'm just kind of like, this is this last little piece. Do they have the 5 guys that can end up doing these last few moments of a game, the highest leverage that you can get in all of basketball? Can you picture those 5 guys doing it? That, I think, is where I ultimately land. Are the Nets a championship contender again? Yes. I think we can agree on that. I think even with all this other context around it, I think we can agree we can start thinking or begin or continue or wherever you landed, thinking about the Nets as a championship level contending team, even though this season has been, different than any other championship contender ever. That's no doubt. But there's other things to think about. There's the path. There's the 5. There's the closing team. There's how these other things that are going to line up that are still question marks. So are they contenders? Yes. Can we reform some of our expectations around to think, hey, this is kind of championship or bust? It's close. I think that's where I'm going to land. It's close. I would love to hear from some of you out there. Like, leave a comment on the YouTube video if you think there's anything off base here, because this is kind of where I'm landing. I thought about this a lot over the last 48 hours since the mandate basically got lifted. It said, should I just start rethinking about this? I have not thought about this team as a championship team in a long time, because you cannot let your brain go there for fear of just being disappointed. But I think we're in a point now where we can begin to start thinking about it again. Leave a comment over on YouTube. Like I said, we had like 100 comments over on YouTube. Really, really appreciate all the nice words of people that have liked and subscribed over on YouTube. Go and do that as well. Leave a comment there, and make sure you like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, available on all platforms. Like I said, I'll be out of the hotel podcasting game starting Monday, back with Adam next week. We'll be back again next week talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.